Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to FIU, the Stephen J. Green School of International Public Affairs, and what we expect to be an incredibly enlightening and provocative conversation on the aftermath of the recent tragic earthquake in Haiti. My name is Brian Fonseca. I'm director of the Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy. And again, it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. I want to briefly introduce our moderator, an absolute treasure in the South Florida community, actually a treasure in the global community. But I want to introduce Jackie Charles and then kick it over to her to drive the discussion for the next hour or so. And so Jackie, welcome. Jackie Charles is a Pulitzer Prize winning finalist and Emmy Award winning foreign correspondent for the Miami Herald with responsibility for Haiti and the English speaking Caribbean. She began her journalism career, like most of us, at such a young age of 14 years old, where she was an intern and then, of course, hired immediately upon graduating from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Shortly after graduating, her first overseas assignment was the return of Haitian President Jean Marc Aristide, and that came shortly after her graduation. As the Herald's Haiti correspondent, Jackie was again on the front lines for the second return of Aristide, and was the first journalist to inform readers of his arrival to the island nation just days before Haiti's historic 2011 presidential runoff. Jackie is a founding member of the Carolina Association of Black Journalists, a past president and scholarship chairwoman at the South Florida Association of Black Journalists, as a former assistant director of the University of Miami Dow Jones High School Journalism Workshop. She currently serves on the University of North Carolina's School of Media and Journalism Board of Advisors, and is a close friend and colleague of Florida International University. And so with that, Jackie, I hope that did a very small service in what has been an amazing career. And so I'll turn it over to you to drive this incredibly important discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this discussion on the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake. Next week will mark a month since a powerful 7.2 quake struck Haiti on August 14th, killing more than 2,200 people and damaging or destroying more than 129,000 homes in 3 regional departments. And that number, we also have hundreds of schools as well as churches, structures that would have served as shelter during the ongoing hurricane season. While the experts will tell you we should not compare disasters, the initial visual narrative of August 14th was that it wasn't as bad as 2010, which left more than 300,000 dead and Port-au-Prince partially destroyed. But this, some will tell you, is worse in other ways. The damage is far more dispersed, located in hard to reach, often mountainous regions of the country where it is hard to rebuild. The location also presented logistical challenges for distributing aid, which was further complicated by heavy rains from Tropical Storm Grace, roads and bridges damaged by the earthquake, gang threats, and a country undergoing already a humanitarian, economic, social, and political crisis, not to mention the recent assassination of its president, Jovenel Moïse. In response, the U.S. military flew 671 missions, ferrying nearly 600,000 pounds of humanitarian assistance and assisted or rescued 477 people. Today, I am pleased to moderate this discussion sponsored by FIU's Jack Gordon Institute for Public Policy. Our distinguished panel is made up of experts on a number of topics that have arisen since the disaster. I will briefly introduce each of them to you, and then we will open it up with opening remarks and then questions. And we invite you to also send in some of your questions. Our first panelist is Ambassador Dan Foote. Dan was named a special envoy for Haiti in July after spending the past year as a faculty member at the Marine Corps War College. He's a former U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Zambia, acting assistant secretary in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs at the Department of State, and a former deputy assistant secretary. He has honed his diplomatic skills in some of the world's most challenging high-threat environments. We also have, who will be joining us later, retired Lieutenant General Ken Keane, a native of Hyden, Kentucky. Retired Lieutenant General Keane retired from active duty in March 2013 and currently serves as Associate Dean of Leadership Development and a Senior Lecturer in Management for Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. In his stellar military career, he commanded several posts, but he's probably most remembered for this audience as the head of the Joint Task Force Haiti following the devastating 2010 earthquake. We also have with us Ann Lee. Ann Lee is CEO and co-founder at the community organized relief effort CORE, alongside actor Sean Penn, who previously founded the Haiti-focused charity JPHRO. Prior to joining CORE, Ann worked in numerous humanitarian organizations, including in Haiti. We also have Jean Marc De Matteis, who is CEO of L'Hôpital Albert Schweitzer Haiti, a 200-bed hospital with a staff of over 500 professionals who provide integrated hospital and community-based healthcare services to a population of more than 350,000 people in a 610 square mile radius. He has been long active in public health efforts in Haiti, and he serves on various boards, including World Central Kitchen and Haiti Air Ambulance. So we will start with you, Jean Marc, with some brief introductory remarks, and then we'll go to Anne. And if Lieutenant General Keane is here, we'll go to him, and then after that, Ambassador Foote. Jean Marc.
Great. Well, thank you, Jacqueline. Great to be with you, and thank you to a big thank you to FIU for kind of bringing us all together today. It's always nice to be on a distinguished panel of folks who have a lot of experience in Haiti, kind of coming together to discuss the challenges that we are collectively facing right now. First, want to start off with, like you said, there are some comparisons to the 2010 earthquake and some not. A huge challenge is the geographic area, the remoteness of these communities. That is a big difference from the 2010 earthquake. And I have to say that, you know, the official figures haven't been updated in quite some time in terms of fatalities. I think we're approximately at 2,500, but certainly in our anecdotal evidence getting out to these remote areas, that number is going to end up being much, much higher than the 2,500 figure, as well as damages or destroyed homes. Those figures are going to go nowhere but up as we continue to access these isolated communities. So it's great to be with everybody here today, and I'll turn it back over to you.
And CORE has been out in communities like Maniche in the South, where the mayor estimates that over half of the homes in that community have been damaged or destroyed. Can you share with us some remarks on how CORE has been responding to this disaster?
Sure. For us, you know, having been there for so long, and our teams, which is our Haitian team, who actually have responded to other crises like the Bahamas and in Florida, the things that have really come out is that leadership matters, local knowledge matters, and partnerships matter. Leadership in terms of working very closely with DPC, the Department of Civil Protection, having such clear leadership and making sure that everyone is coordinating has been very, very different and extremely productive. Our teams, knowing this area unfortunately too well from responding to Hurricane Matthew and having folks on the ground already within 24 hours was a big, only because we had so many folk that we had worked with in the past from those areas. And again, partnerships, you know, working very closely with World Central Kitchen, with Direct Relief and other partners. It's almost become secondhand, you know, for us to be able to weave in, a package of services to be able to support communities and share information very quickly and in real time. And it's sort of presenting itself of, you know, knowing what we know, that these are unfortunately not going to be the only disasters that we're going to see until we start investing in the longer term solutions. Having some of these prepackaged responses with partnerships, investing in leadership, and also investing in our local knowledge is critically important in preparation for the next disaster.
Thank you. Retired Lieutenant General Keane, you have the benefit of having been in Haiti immediately after 2010, and you were recently there after this quake. Can you share with us some of your thoughts on Haiti in the aftermath of the quake?
Yeah, well, yeah, first, thank you, Jacqueline, for hosting this with FIU. It's great to be on this venue with these leaders who really make it happen on the ground. What I walked away with a recent visit that I had the privilege of being there with Anne and others is the importance of the international community, the leadership of the United States to provide capabilities that are unique. And I'm talking here primarily for our military that need to be ready to step up and provide unique capabilities. I was really impressed with the leadership on the ground of NGOs such as CORE, World Central Kitchen, Haitians themselves in the communities, and the Haitian leadership at the national level. And I think in many ways, as you already pointed out, there are similarities, but there are some significant differences, but particularly the difficulty of the challenges of the geographical area. But I walked away actually being with really optimistic in terms of the lessons I think that have been learned by NGOs as well as our military, trying to apply them this time around. And obviously there are a lot of challenges ahead, but I also walked away with the sense that, you know, once again, the trauma and the psychological impact that has been delivered to the Haitian people is something I don't think you can truly understand until you walk in the streets and see the children and what they've lost in these communities. It's just devastating.
Thank you. Ambassador Foote, you've been engaging with the Haitian community in Haiti and in the United States, where you recently met with members of the diaspora here in South Florida. What is some of the feedback you've received, and what are your thoughts when you look at this current humanitarian challenge?
Thank you very much, Jackie, for moderating, and to FIU and my fellow panelists. I'm the panelist who doesn't belong here because everybody else is an expert. I'm a self-avowed non-expert in Haiti. The biggest challenge I've seen in the response to this earthquake is the security situation, and the gangs' ability to control areas of Haiti and the main road down to the south. We were fortunate to have Joint Task Force Haiti, the 2021 version, and many of the NGOs who work closely to ferry a bunch of aid over land, but there were a lot of severe limitations, and much of it had to be flown by air and go around by sea. And the security situation remains a big challenge for reconstruction, for political agreement, and to move forward for elections. Thanks.
Well, Ambassador Foote, since you brought that up, I'm going to open up with a question that was sent in to us exactly on this issue. The question is, affected population needs immediate access to economic opportunities, but access to the Grand Sud, the Big South, is disabled due to gang proliferation. How will the international community empower Haitian authorities for an appropriate response against terrorism, or will it sit on the balcony and watch the theater of economic and political disaster unfold?
I've never been accused of sitting on the balcony before, so hopefully this time, while we're here, that will definitely not be the case. Our biggest challenge is the immediacy of the problem, and the fact that almost any response is going to take some time. We are working closely with the Haitian National Police to set up, invigorate, equip, train, advise, and assist an anti-gang task force, which is going to be a critical step in returning the Haitian ground to its people from the gangs. That will take, unfortunately, several months to get up and running. And in the interim, Haitians are going to have to continue to rely on the national police. There is no quick solution. There is a right solution that will take some time, and it's critical that the people can move around freely and comfortably, particularly Port-au-Prince, and now the countryside in the south, so that relief can flow better, and so that once Haitian authorities decide on election time, so that elections can be held and they can be acceptable to the Haitian people.
Let me just follow up with that. You talk about an anti-gang task force. Exactly what would this look like? Because right now the security situation seems that it is beyond the control of the government as well as the police. Given your background in places like Colombia and your current role, I mean, what would a security support look like? What does it need to have? I know the U.S. has announced $5 million. People are saying that that's a drop in the bucket. So can you give us a little bit more specific in terms of what's the vision for tackling the security issue?
I can, and first I'll talk to the resources. So one of the few benefits of our Afghanistan challenges is that there are more resources than $5 million. So I don't need to run around looking for money immediately. The Haitian police, we have worked closely with since 1994. And when I left after living in Haiti as the #2 in the embassy in 2012, the police were adequate in Haiti. And my analysis, having been down there a couple times, is the police are outmanned and outgunned in the current situation, but they haven't fallen completely apart. The leadership needs to be carefully vetted. The political appointments in the police need to be undone and go back to a professional force. Everyone would need to be vetted, and we need to reestablish the capabilities of handling operations, knowing how to protect the citizenship so that it's without collateral damage, and to be able to go after high-risk arrest warrants like the individuals in charge of the gangs.
Great. We're going to come back to you because you're getting a lot of questions in, but we're going to switch to focus a little bit, and I promise we're going to come back to the security issue in Haiti momentarily. And how do you view your mission as an NGO? Who are you accountable to, and in what ways are you holding yourself accountable to the people you're trying to help?
At the end of the day, it's the communities that we are accountable to. We feel very strongly that, our support is working through local institutions, whether they be the health system or the emergency response system through the DPC. We are very lucky in that we've had very great partnerships with the Ministry of Public Works, on the ground folk that we've been working with for years and years. So it's been a lot easier to work within and strengthen those systems. So we're not working in competition or sort of, not coordinating with them. Again, that's a huge lesson from the 2010 experience. And because all of our staff are from Haiti, they've been working with them throughout these last 10 years. It's a very interesting shorthand that they have, again, in terms of being able to work through them. But at the end of the day, we're accountable to the communities that we're serving. And for us, how we consistently do that, I think, is making sure that, what we focus on is to have a robust community mobilization team. Everything starts there. It's a feedback loop that constantly is a match, so we know how things are going. When things are not going well, they will let us know. In Haiti, one thing that we've learned is that, people will let you know. We have all kinds of mechanisms to be able to also do that anonymously through hotline numbers that are anonymous. And also we encourage, and what we try to do as we're moving towards, this emergency phase to the recovery phase, is to have these call-in, radio shows, interactive moments, so that we can constantly have that feedback loop. But at the end of the day, our mission is not just this emergency relief period, but it's to address these fundamental issues that, are at the intersection of so many things. It's the climate change, it's the livelihoods piece, and looking at how can we move away from the band-aided solutions and make sure that we're strengthening homes and communities, not just one house, but entire communities. That's why we're so focused on making sure that, the hundreds of hospitals and the clinics and the schools that went down, that we need to be looking at those things that have impact on several hundreds of people within that region, to get them back up online again.
You're in the Grandance, and I'm very curious as to whether the aid is getting into some of these really far-reaching communities, especially given the fact that that bridge is down. And you've been engaging with other NGOs on the ground. What can you tell us? Is the aid reaching these communities? What needs to happen that isn't happening?
It is not. And even for us, we've been having a difficult time to get out there. What needs to happen is we have the solutions at hand. We need to fix that bridge. We need to fix, at least temporarily, that road that connects Lekai to Jeremy. Those are not difficult, and there's solutions that are ready and there. It's just a will of determination from, larger donor countries and the government and, the World Bank and all these folk to basically just push forward. I mean, this is a discussion that Jean Marc and I were having beforehand. We're trying to get aid, and how long can we rely on air support to bring in materials, everything from heavy equipment to, housing construction materials and all those things. It's a huge bottleneck. So for us, without that piece, we definitely are stymied, and in our own ways, we're going to be pushing to advocate for that.
Dan, there was some talk about a possible Bailey Bridge. Are you privy to any of those discussions, or has this come across your desk to assist with the bridge that's been damaged, that's connecting Lekai to Jeremy? Oh, you're mute.
Are you asking me, Jackie?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. No, this is, other than in my talks with my fellow panelists here, it has not come across my desk. I think people are working with other parts of the U.S. government on that.
Okay,
but I'm
great.
happy to assist in any way I can.
Okay. Jean Marc, L'Hôpital Albert Schweitzer is among those that have been on the front lines even before this disaster. You guys have been part of the COVID response. But I want to talk first about the role in another organization, World Central Kitchen, which was born in Haiti during the last earthquake in 2010, and how its relationship with local groups like L'Hôpital Albert Schweitzer is important in shaping its response. And I'd also like to get some of your reflections in terms of the response to the role of local Haitian organizations in this current crisis.
Yeah, sure. Jose Andres, who's an amazing, amazing human being, founded World Central Kitchen in 2010, in large part influenced by the original 2010 earthquake here in Haiti. The organization, through his vision, he's grown the organization to something amazing that it is today. So within 24 hours, World Central Kitchen had deployed into Haiti. And they're very effective, not just in Haiti, but everywhere around the world, because of their flexibility in engaging local stakeholders and most effectively coming in and helping. So our role at Albert Schweitzer was simply logistic and support role to get them to where they needed to be and let them do their thing. So far, World Central Kitchens has served already 420,000 meals. And that's in a relatively short amount of time to those most in need. Set up kitchens in Jeremy and in Kai and other very, very inaccessible places. So an amazing organization, and they get it. Step one, World Central Kitchen listens. Hey, they don't come in and say, hey, this is what you're gonna get. They say, hey, affected communities, what do you need? And then they go, are there local partners that can help us get there effectively? And so my relationship with World Central Kitchen has been intimate from day one. But in terms of Albert Schweitzer, we've been able to provide them with some local help in terms of logistics and so forth.
Okay, great. Lieutenant General Keane, we're going to come to you. JTF Haiti, this episode of it, including the Coast Guard, they mobilized 19 helicopters, 6 ships, 8 transport aircraft, as well as 1,200 personnel. They were present there for 20 days. As commander of all U.S. forces in Haiti in 2010, you led the largest U.S. military operation in support of the foreign natural disaster operation. we've got a number of questions that have come in terms of how U.S. Southern Command can help play a futuristic role, given the fact that we're probably going to see more natural disasters in places, like Haiti. Also, I would like if you can take us back to sort of 2010, and what is it that we should know about that response, that disaster? And I'm curious as to, when you look at the current response here, what are some of your thoughts, and where do we go with this? I mean, how do we get to a point where this country doesn't always need to have the U.S. military come in to do airlifts to provide humanitarian assistance?
Thank you, Jack, for the question. My first response would be, we need to always be prepared for disasters like this in Haiti, because they're going to happen. History tells us that. So, following 2010, there were extensive after action reviews done and discussions, and U.S. Southern Command asked us for a question at the time: how can we play a positive role working with the Haitian government and the U.S. Embassy there in preparing them for the next disaster? And in that aspect, it gets to working with the U.S. Embassy, and our security assistance program is working and building Haitian capacity and responding to disasters within the country, emergency operations centers, in placing warehouse supplies so that you can help Haitians help themselves and local communities as much as possible. It never is done as robustly or as fastly as anyone wants it, but I think from a strategic planning perspective, the Haitians need to keep working at that, and that's where I think our security assistance apparatus can help the Haitians. Given that, I think we always have to be prepared, because it hadn't just been 2010. There's been other cases since 2010 that the U.S. military have had to respond to tropical storms. Is that it outstrips the capacity of a nation like Haiti to respond to its own disasters. We see that in the United States. We just saw it in the Northeast. We just saw it in Louisiana. Those states in themselves could not adequately respond to the disaster. They had to ask for the federal government to come in, and NGOs like CORE to help them out. So I think that's going to be a constant situation that they have to be prepared for. And I think what we see in the form of the Joint Task Force Haiti is what unique capabilities can they provide in a immediate response mode that cannot be provided by other entities like NGOs. And what JTF provided through the use of helicopters and logistical support was that. And they're not going to stay there forever. They were only there for a little over 3 weeks before it was deemed that their mission had transpired. But I think a recognition by leaders at every level, and I think that recognition certainly is there in Haiti. But disaster response starts in the local communities and building capacity in local communities. And I'm not the expert on that. The expert is Ann Lee and others, Jose Andres and others who work in those communities. But that's true whether it's Haiti or whether it's Louisiana or whether it's New York or New Jersey.
Okay, great. We have a follow-up question for you from a member of our audience. And let me just start it off by saying, my understanding is whenever you're putting together a humanitarian mission involving the military, there's always concerns about this humanitarian mission morphing into a security issue, what is often referred to as mission creep. But one of our attendees wanted to know, would a light U.S. military footprint be helpful, like providing security to escorted aid convoys, keeping in mind that as soon as the U.S. military ended its mission after 20 days, we saw a spike, a return in kidnappings and insecurity and gang violence?
Well, I'll give you my personal opinion. I think the U.S. military, when it comes to cases like this, are best used in providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and not in the security mission. I think there are other capabilities, there are other resources that can be leaned upon. And as Ambassador Foote noted, the U.S. government the embassy have been working with the Haitian police to build capacity, and the Haitians need to build that capacity within their own. I think bringing in foreign forces to provide security in Haiti would not be my first option, and certainly I don't think the U.S. military would be the right option to bring in to deal with the issue here. I would, if Haiti asked for that assistance outside their own resources, I think there are other countries, United Nations, that they should have those discussions with.
Okay. Pivoting over to you, Ambassador Foote, prior to your naming, the Biden administration had been criticized for continuing with the same policy of its predecessor. Since the summer, we've seen a stepped up engagement, starting with your appointment and most recently discussions with diaspora communities in the aftermath of the earthquake. Is there a common thread in terms of what you are hearing? And also, what is the Biden administration's roadmap for Haiti?
Thank you, Jackie. There are a lot of common threads, but let me explain where the Biden administration and I am right now on this. I first started in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. That's where I met our other panelists and General Keane, and have been working off and on in Haiti since then. I watched our reconstruction plans be formulated and implemented after that. I left Haiti in 2012 and came back in July, and it's 100 times worse. So obviously our reconstruction plans, although they were based on the best of intentions, did not work well. And as I look back at the history books, I think one of the big reasons is we tried to solve the problem without Haitian leadership. And so this time, I and the US government is admitting, we know how not to fix Haiti. Let's lean on Haitian-led solutions to come to a political agreement, to move forward on elections with a new government, et cetera. So my job has been one of largely listening and looking for the best ways the US can support Haitian solutions. And as many of you know, the dialogue has been positive and has progressed in Haiti over the past 6 weeks. And I'm cautiously optimistic that there will be some sort of consensus in the not too distant future.
Along the lines of reconstruction, we'll start with you, Ambassador Foote, and we'll go down the line. Is there a role for the international community for helping Haiti reconstruct, and what should it look like? We're not hearing a lot of money or promises like we did in 2010, and Administrator Powers was asked this question, but we still did not hear of any plans in terms of reconstruction. So I'm just wondering, is there talk of reconstruction? And for those of you who are not in the decision-making role, should the US and others in international be involved, and what should it look like?
Dan Foote's opinion, absolutely. There's an enormous role for the US and the international community. I think because this event was different in magnitude, although not in tragedy, that there's a different level of international appetite. You won't see $14 billion, I don't think, like we did after the 2010 earthquake from the international community. But we are focused, and USAID and Ambassador Power is focused on longer term reconstruction. The short-term challenge is we need to implement that with a partner that's considered that is legitimate in the eyes of the Haitian people. And I think that's why a political agreement is critical to get to a point where a transition government leading towards elections is legitimate in Haitians' eyes.
And reconstruction?
Most definitely. I mean, $32 million in response to this earthquake is nothing. It's not sufficient. We're talking about an entire southern region, which is the Haiti's breadbasket, already suffering from food insecurity, and also has a huge amount of reforestation activities already happening before the crisis that are all it's all on hold. For us to just look at, $32 million that have been allocated by the US government, it is not enough. It is not enough, and that is a short-term Band-Aid solution. Unless we're starting to look at these longer-term investments into the systems, leadership, the hospitals, the clinics that all went down, the schools, we're just looking at just, next year and the following year, again, putting in another small chunk that'll just deal with the current crisis. Again, we need to build within these systems, and that's going to take a lot more than what we're seeing right now. I also think the diaspora, has a huge potential role to play in this. We saw after 2010 the amount of rebuilding and incredible amount of change that they were part of. How do we leverage that? How do we make sure that that's also being sort of directed in a way where we can build off of that together? There's a frustration, I think, on our side, just being on the ground, and that, there's so many ways that we can look at this, and that, there's so much exodus that's happening. I think 70% of the folks that are coming through Panama at this point in time are Haitian, and they're all heading towards the United States. And for us, all of these things are interrelated. It's basically a huge exodus that we don't want, because one of Haiti's greatest resources are its people, and keeping their incredible, the brain drain that we're losing, and just the resources that we're losing through people just kind of, leaving Haiti is going to be problematic and have an impact on the country generations from now.
Thank you. Jean Marc?
Sure. I mean, I think I echo a lot of those points. Again, I've been in many affected areas here over the past few weeks, and there is total devastation in some of these areas. So reconstruction is going to be at the forefront, of the next phase of this. And I just want to make another point here, Jackie. It is a challenging environment. I mean, we're sitting here dealing with this massive cataclysm. Tropical storms. We're still in hurricane season. I want to really kind of emphasize that. And we're dealing with a COVID outbreak here with all the Delta variants and so on and so forth, and have a minuscule portion of the population, the 12 million that have been vaccinated, and in the midst of a huge political and security crisis just for fun on top of it. So the challenges are immense. But I really, want to kind of communicate, not to get discouraged out there. There are solutions to these issues. People's involvement, first and foremost. Anybody who's logged on today certainly has a love for Haiti. It's a special place with special people, and we want to keep people engaged and involved. It's challenging, but I think that we can get through it.
Lieutenant General Keane, in 2010, the U.S. was really pushing for the Haitian government to provide land as part of this reconstruction plan. What we saw was that temporary housing that was promised never arrived, which I think added to a lot of the criticism that folks had toward yourself, but others and NGOs that supported this push for plan. I'm wondering, when you look at reconstruction today, what should it entail, and what role should the U.S. or any others should play in this?
Well, at first, I think what I took away is don't do it halfway. I mean, if you're going to do it, it's got to be from beginning to end. So you can't stop with just the emergency housing solution, which is what we proposed in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake to protect people who were in very vulnerable areas against ensuing the rainy season, who are literally in dry riverbeds that were going to be washed out to sea, to get them relocated in an emergency situation, to establish emergency shelter areas, awaiting for a longer term plan, which wasn't which was bought into by the international community, but not funded. And of course, what we know now is it never was funded. So they still live in those emergency shelters. So, you have to get commitment from beginning to end to ensure that you can deliver at the end. I think the other thing is, obviously, is try to, when you do have to build emergency shelters, do it as close to the point of the damage as possible, and allow people to stay close and enter their communities. I think that could be obviously a lesson from this case, where you're trying to provide shelter. As noted, we're in hurricane season, so we have a lot of vulnerable communities and Haitians that are going to be exposed to that if we aren't prepared for it in the immediacy of the situation. So how do you prepare for it? How do you give them some type of shelter solution that is as close to their home as possible, but safe?
Following up on that, last year when I talked to Claude Pripety, who is the foremost expert on earthquakes, in Haiti, he talked about the fact that we're going to get a big one. And the prediction, though, was that it would be in the north, as unpredictable as earthquakes are. Well, this one was bigger than 2010, but it happened in the south, an area that is not as populated as the capital. Given that Haiti has fault lines running throughout, how do we prepare? And are there discussions? Dan, I'm wondering too if this is part of your discussion, but we'll start with, Keane, in terms of how does this country prepare for the next big one that can be worse than August 14th and even 2010? We'll start with you, Lieutenant General Keane, and now move to Dan.
Well, I think the overused term "build back better," and I hate, I sort of reluctantly use that because we haven't necessarily always done that. But I think in terms of as you build back in these community areas, do it with the knowledge, obviously, that you are susceptible to these type of events. So as best as you can with the resource you have, build back and use the resources you can to do that. And also acknowledge, obviously, other types of risk that you're going to be associated with. And they're going to need international communities' help to do this, obviously. As Ann said, the price tag of infusion is helping organizations that are Haitian-led on the ground, that know what's best for these communities, and find that organization and donate to them and empower them to work with Haitians to build back their communities better.
Ambassador Foote, any discussions about providing more than $32 million in assistance? And this time around, is there an alternative for that money not to go directly to NGOs, but to others?
That's the discussion right now. There will be more money for Haiti. The question is under what congressional vehicle. That's part of my job, although Ambassador Power and USAID play an immense role because they're the development experts. But we plan to go to Congress, and we've already had some opening conversations about the extraordinary needs that Haiti faces on the reconstruction side, on the governance side, and on the security side. So, and there appears to be a bipartisan appetite to assist Haiti. The sense of the magnitude, I don't have numbers in my head yet, but the 32 million is an immediate response number that Administrative Power came out with.
If I can just add on to that really quickly, Jackie, I think that what we've learned from 2010 is that even though folks in Port-au-Prince, they understood that, building back safer is planning for the next earthquake that could happen. The issue is that people are addressing risks very differently. Do I have the funding right now to feed my kids and send them to school versus something that could happen in the future I don't even know about? So what we saw is that people still built back unsafely. And so unless we address that, and that we prioritize how people are addressing their risks, which is schooling for their kids, security to get something around them, especially in an area like Port-au-Prince, to have, you know, a block house is a security issue rather than plastic sheeting. So until we address that, you know, building back safer is going to be very difficult for the majority of the population. But you know, to be able to address that in a way that is accessible is, how do we subsidize materials? How do we subsidize training and you know, the technical part to get people who are doing sort of the ad hoc incremental building, which is the majority of how building happens in Haiti, to be able to equip people to have access to those in a very low cost way. There's no way that we're going to see that. So we have to start thinking about, right now, every new construction should have subsidized materials that go along with technical capacity that can help people to build as they're going along much safer. You know, how do we make investments in activities like that right now for moving forward? Retrofits are not cheap. How we deal with that in prioritizing, like, you know, big densely populated cities like Cap-Haïtien, which is going to be another huge disaster should an earthquake hit on that fault line. You know, it's kind of working out, you know, what can we do right now in the interim, in the pieces that we can handle it. And for those larger pieces, that's going to take a lot of commitment from, you know, the big dogs like the World Banks and the IDBs and, you know, the US government, for us to really make those investments so that we don't have another 2010 in the future.
This is something that I also heard on the ground, which is that, you know, a bag of cement costs like 1 million gourds. It's out of the financial reach of most Haitians. And this is a country that, you know, the economy is a mess. Some will say worse than when Aristide, you know, was ousted a few years ago. And Dan, I'm coming back to you, I'm sorry, but I'm wondering in these conversations, you know, is anyone talking about how do we help this country to safeguard itself or prepare itself? There's always money, not a lot, but there always seems to be money for the humanitarian, the emergency. But whenever the UN and others have tried to get money for development for Haiti, there's a reluctancy or there's no interest. And I'm wondering, in those conversations with members of Congress, USA being the biggest funder to Haiti, are we now rethinking about what we need to do? Because this came up in 2010. US Army Corps of Engineers, they went around, they assessed, they tagged all of these homes, they talked about training people, but at the end of the day, we still saw people using the sand from the mountains to rebuild.
Absolutely, Jackie. I think this comes back to highlight the need to work with local partners, because in the past, we haven't done a good job of understanding local conditions, culture, risk assessments, et cetera. So we did build a bunch of housing after the last earthquake, but it wasn't the right kind of housing for the people and the places. So it's critical that we do this with community-based organizations like Ann's and Sean's and other ones, rather than the easy path of least resistance, giant beltway NGOs. As Ann mentions, it will be difficult without a comprehensive plan coming out of the Haitian government to compel people to build back at the right standards. I think it can be done, but it's hard. I can only imagine what it cost in Los Angeles to make that place earthquake safer. And we all know there will be more. You've seen Sanssouci Palace in the north, which collapsed under a huge one, and they haven't had one in 200 years. But we need to work together with the Haitian government. The biggest mistake we made in the past was imposing our solutions on Haitians. And so I think it's important that Haitians have a demand signal for safe housing, which I think they will. And B, we have a partner with whom we can work that can help us implement that.
Dan, how do you do that in the current political environment where you have a situation that's very distressing? You have a government that's constantly coming under fire and questions of legitimacy. And so far, the political class and civil society haven't been able to figure out or agree on a mechanism of a transition or elections. How do you, as an international partner, work with that? And how does it get the credibility to tell people this is what we're going to do, this is what needs to happen?
Well, that's my job, the political dialogue and encouraging it and staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning, sending texts to these folks. Maybe you should go talk to him. So that's my job. And I think they will get an adequate consensus on political agreement. It definitely won't include everybody. All parties need to come to the table because no party, the Haitian people don't have to convince any party to be part of this. All parties need to convince the Haitian people that they should be part of a transition. So that's a huge obstacle. We can continue with short-term relief, but the international community is going to be very careful about how much money it provides to the current interim government until there's a solution. And I'm confident that there will be one.
What is the U.S. current position on elections, and how soon should they take place?
There's not a rush to failure. They cannot take place in the near term because of security, because of this political discord. I don't think the current interim de facto government can hold credible elections without a political agreement. So it will take time to reestablish security, and it will take time for interim accord provisional government to establish electoral council, possibly reform the Constitution, et cetera. So the US position is now we would like Haitians to hold elections as soon as the conditions are adequate. And that's not going to be in the next few months.
We're going to bounce around a little bit, just so I can get some of the questions in that have been coming in from our audience. Jean Marc, this one's going to be for you. COVID-19 vaccination plan and response, especially in the Southern Peninsula, even though Albert Schweitzer is in the Artibonite Central Plateau area, but it's a problem that affects the whole country. I mean, should there be a special COVID-19 emergency vaccination campaign conducted? I see Anne
Sure.
shaking her head too. So go ahead.
Yeah, as I had mentioned, this is obviously a health crisis. I mean, the only way, around COVID is to vaccinate our way out of it. And this is an issue that I'd like to really call everyone's attention to, because it doesn't just affect us here in Haiti. We're an hour and a half away from Miami. And so a population of 12 million unvaccinated folks living in oftentimes crowded conditions in Port-au-Prince. If we think the Delta variant is a challenge, the risk of a variant coming out of this so close to the United States is something that everybody in the United States, even if they didn't care about Haiti, should care about. So the answer to your question is absolutely yes. The problem, as we've discussed here, are the challenges of implementing said campaign in a security environment that's difficult, where there's large distrust in government, where there's a lot of disinformation, a lot of the things that health professionals have been dealing with in the United States and others places, we also are dealing with disinformation and distrust. So at HAS, we are starting, as a matter of fact, as of very, very recently, the past few days, we've brought in Anne and Core. They've done a great job because they have a lot of experience in this area as well. So we're rolling out our vaccine campaign, but lots of challenges, security being another one of them, to get this thing going. But we're determined to do our part, certainly, in getting as many folks vaccinated as we can.
Anne, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think it's so critically important. A lot of times people aren't even thinking, I mean, again, this is just the hierarchy of what is the biggest risk right now. Families are thinking about how do we get inside? But there's congregate settings that we're seeing right now. So we are actively working within and embedded within the MSPP, the Ministry of Health, to get vaccines to the South as urgently as possible through partnerships, amazing partnerships like we have with Haas, with Jesquio, with Partners in Health, and with Immaculate to get those vaccines down there. You know, it's this chicken and egg thing. You know, we've been talking about making sure that folks are open to it, the sensitization, because they're, again, more concerned right now about foods, you know, shelter and those most critical basic needs. But at the same time, like, you know, the vaccinations are critically important as well. So making it as accessible as possible for people so that as they're getting other services that we can provide that as well, I think is going to be a great way to get folk vaccinated in the South.
Okay. And we're going to stay with you for a few. Cash for work, meals, and food for work used to be traditional ways of aiding Haitians in similar circumstances after disaster. What would be a sustainable recovery plan to reanimate some key sectors like agriculture?
We feel so strongly. I mean, again, partnering with World Central Kitchen has been phenomenal in that, you know, we support Accesso, and they basically have an incredible program where they're supporting farmers and provide a stable market price throughout the year for things that fluctuate quite a bit. So it gives security to farmers, and they've been able to develop huge relationships with the Southern farmers. And so World Central Kitchen has been sourcing a lot of their food from these farmers, trying to keep it as local as possible. We purchase everything locally first. Anything that we can't get locally, then we'll go regionally. Because again, learning from 2010, we cannot work with, you know, outside systems and put more pressure on these already hurt businesses to compete with outside businesses. So buying locally, supporting local farmers as much as possible, but also most importantly, we need to get folks who lost their businesses and their resources reasseted, you know, providing grants. We've seen this in so many disasters, getting grants to small businesses up and running, the tea marchand, the folk who've lost, like, you know, their small, you know, supplies of, you know, the produce, or even small stores, is so restaurants, little restaurants. You know, it's not a hurricane where things are, you know, the supply chain hasn't been hit so hard that they won't be able to get these things restarted. So getting those businesses back up and running is so hugely important. So right now, that's as soon as like the shelter phase is kind of kicked off, we're turning straight into that space. Farmers, small businesses, and reassetting the South.
Okay. Final question for you on this topic, but it has to do more with CORE. JPHRO was in Haiti after the quake. They were there during Matthew. A lot of people don't realize that, but you recently changed your name. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how does CORE's mission differ from JPHRO?
We're one organization. You know, one of our big hopes and dreams, because our teams in Haiti are so incredibly strong and amazing, we've asked them to essentially respond to other disasters outside of Haiti. They've responded to Bahamas with us, and in Southern Florida as well. You know, we feel very strongly that, you know, we're a very community-led organization. And so having a Haitian team, we would love to see the organization JPHRO spin off as a 100% Haitian organization, you know, and we can support it until it gets in a place where, you know, they're able to kind of sustain themselves on their own. But essentially, that's the dream. We want to equip our incredible Haitian staff to be able to just, you know, as they've been doing, run on their own. And, you know, when they need some surge support, we'll come in and provide some surge support. But otherwise, to be running things 100% as a Haitian-led team is where we're going.
We're getting a number of questions about the role of the diaspora, so I will open this up to the panelists who would like to answer this particular question. Build Back Better is a good slogan. However, we see over and over again building back better with the same traditional players. How do we engage different players, even in the diaspora? Dan, I'm sure you heard this a lot.
I feel so strongly about this.
Yeah, so there's a very enthusiastic and energetic diaspora across not just the United States, but Canada, the Caribbean, Brazil, Chile, France, etc. It's a complicated diaspora, though, as you know, Jackie, and there are a number of influential and well-off diaspora leaders who are really mobilizing for the betterment of Haiti without agendas, which is rare. And the more that come together, the better. And part of the discussions, the dialogue, I'm sorry I keep coming back to this, is to include the diaspora. And at the beginning, because there's a certain sense in Haiti, there's a certain anti-diaspora among some factions, but it's not huge. They changed my mind that they should include the diaspora, because the diaspora has lived in other countries, been very successful under rule of law and anti-corruption things that we're trying to institute in Haiti. So they need to be a big part of this. They're all enthusiastic. They all feel pretty strongly about this being a major opportunity for change in Haiti, from the traditional political class kind of manipulates the elections and then maintains power, and the people see nothing. And I think this is an opportunity for the people to have a voice. Let me go back to COVID for 1 second. And Jean Marc and Anne, you can agree or disagree. I think the international community is hiding a little bit behind vaccine hesitance in Haiti for the low numbers, when we need money is really what we need to do vaccines. We know how much money, we know how to do it. And if there's any influential listeners out there who would like to talk to your local elected or federal elected officials, the United States has money for this. And I support us backing the COVID vaccines, but we're going to need a little more pressure on the decision makers to bump Haiti above other countries in that line. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, great. And you want to say about the diaspora, and let me just also follow up in terms of what needs to happen differently to engage the diaspora, because I'm sure Dan has realized this, that, you know, the diaspora is just as diverse, just as divided as Haitian society itself. So how do you figure out who do you engage with and how do you engage them?
That's the $64 billion question. I think that there are over 300 Haitian diaspora groups alone in the United States, many of whom have an enormous agenda. They want a job, they want to be ambassador, they want us to influence policies so that they can import stuff from Haiti, whatever it is. And most are not representative. There are a number of excellent, more representative diaspora organizations. And what I've been telling everybody is I'm happy to talk to or listen to everybody. But if I talk to each one of these 300 organizations, I won't do anything else. So the diaspora needs to come together with already established, more representative organizations as a group. They don't have to join these organizations, but rather than me meeting with 300, how about if we get them together 10 or 20 at a time, and I meet with 15 or 30. So that we need that diaspora needs to organize to become more representative, because otherwise they're highly fractured, let's say.
And
I think that working at two different levels is important. As Dan said, kind of organizing the diaspora to kind of leverage everyone's interest in a way that's more focused is one level. The other level is at the place where we've seen so much work happen, which is Canaan. Canaan was created mostly by the diaspora. It's a population just outside of Port-au-Prince, which is now Greater Port-au-Prince, that started out with 5,000 families that were moved there, and now has changed to a city of over 300,000 people, if not more, with fully formalized block housing. And that was not supported at all by any organization, by any government, nothing. It was all done by the diaspora, supporting their families to rebuild homes in those areas. The power of diaspora to be able to build a city in a matter of 5 years is to be reckoned with. And I don't think it's through controlling or, I think it's really providing, again, that access and information that if you want to give your family some support to build housing, what we can do is subsidize. We can provide the technical work so that your family's house is going to be strong and it is going to withstand a hurricane and an earthquake. We need to leverage with that already existing pipeline and that system that is so powerful, and not try to recreate the wheel and try to, I think we just work within that system that's already there, whether it's through remittances and what have you, because we know where all those points of access are in terms of getting that funding to families. Have those points of access to get where the money's coming to folk to rebuild their homes, to say, while you're picking up your cash in any of those 3 major, remittance companies, right then and there, you can get, you signed up for your technical assistance and subsidized materials, if you're building something. So I think that we need, again, to learn from what we've seen and work through these incredibly powerful systems that are not formalized, that are not channeled through any specific group or what have you, and just capitalize on that.
Unfortunately, I had a front seat to Keane, and I think Keane is unfortunately a poster child of what goes wrong in a disaster. When you put the aid away from the people, when you force the government to sort of turn over land without all of the I's being dotted and T's being properly crossed. And we saw what, unfortunately, what that situation has come. But I think you raised an important point, and there was discussion on this in 2010 when they were looking at programs, I think in Mexico, where you build housing and those diaspora communities can take out loans, or they can, purchase those housing for their family members, in Haiti. And I think that's part of the planning, that we can see forward. There's a question that came in. I think, Ambassador Foote, probably for you, would the American government be willing to support an anti-corruption program for Haiti like CICIG in Guatemala? We've got a number of questions about corruption, endemic corruption, and how it is a stopgate to progress.
Absolutely. I mean, corruption fuels everything else. It fuels the gangs, it fuels the violence, it fuels the political discord, et cetera. And we have worked on anti-corruption things in the past in Haiti, and we will reinvigorate them. I'm well familiar with CICIG in Guatemala, which was one of the best federal anti-corruption organizations that I've seen in my career. I haven't seen many, but that was a good one. But it was disbanded by the previous Guatemalan president, Jimmy Morales. It's really important. And not only is anti-corruption important, but some sort of rejuvenation of the justice sector, so that in Haiti, so that not only do we deter corruption, but people need to be held accountable for it, such as the Petrocaribe money and et cetera. The people in Haiti are really crying for accountability for past corruption. And without doing that, I don't think you're going to deter future corruption.
Okay, great. We've got a number of questions, but they're more, a lot of them are questions, I think, more for the Haitian government. Some of them in terms of how can local organizations access aid or assistance or food there in order to better serve the communities that they are working with. But I will throw a question out to each of you. There's been a lot of discussions about lessons learned. And one of the things that I did see being on the ground is that this time around, the international community, when it said that it was taking its directives from the Haitian government, from the Office of Civil Protection, I actually saw that. I did not see it bigfooting and saying it's my way or the highway. And so I wonder if you can just talk about a lesson learned that has been obvious, or Dan, in your case, was this part of a discussion, or is it something that happened organically in terms of this time around, we're going to do things differently?
As soon as they asked me to do the job, which was 2 weeks before the earthquake, I think, I told them, look, guys, I have a different take on Haiti than most of us here in the United States, having lived there, worked there, as a former Peace Corps volunteer who likes to roll around with the people and understand what they're thinking. And the oddest part about past reconstruction planning in Haiti, and I sat around the table, there's no Haitians there. What's wrong with this picture? So that I think is a big root cause of our limited success in reconstruction in Haiti. So I asked for the space to pursue Haitian-led solutions and to support them. And voila, that's exactly what the Haitian people in the diaspora have been screaming for forever. And they know what they need. The political agreement, yeah, it's complex, but they know what they need. They will get there, and we'll support it. And my guess is it's going to go a lot more smoothly when it's not solutions made within the Beltway in Washington by a bunch of Americans trying to fix the western half of Hispaniola. It needs to be by the Haitians. That's my biggest lesson learned, is Haitian-led, because well, I can go through history, the number of times we've done it, and we haven't been successful.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Keane.
My first response to that is we're very good, I think, certainly from the U.S. government side, but also the international community of doing after action reviews or reflecting and writing down a lot of lessons we call lessons learned. And I would offer that there are lessons we've observed, but we haven't learned anything until we change our behavior and change our actions to adapt in the future. So while those are very much needed, and we did a lot of these reviews post 2010, observed a lot of lessons, wrote down a lot of lessons. Many of them stayed on paper and never were implemented for a variety of reasons. But what I saw in the recent visit was, whether it was just by circumstances or by deliberately saying we're going to do this differently, I did see around the major challenge that I saw in the 2010 earthquake from an operational strategic area was our challenge and our failure in many cases to effectively collaborate, coordinate, communicate, and cooperate among the NGOs, the United Nations, Haitian government, and other nations to effectively bring all those together for a unity of effort. We were constantly challenged and never really got it right, in my view. And that was a lesson that we observed. Going back to Haiti, I think that has been significantly addressed, led by Dr. Jerry Chandler and his office, and as well as the NGOs like AMP. Part of that is many of these people were there in 2010 and suffered through it and are applying it now. So I would say that the good news story is that there are lessons from 2010 that I think are being applied on the ground. And I think Ambassador Foote's major point of making the solutions Haitian-led is certainly spot on. But just because you do an after-action review and write down lessons and call them lessons learned doesn't mean you've learned anything until you take action to implement those lessons.
Thank you. Jean Marc.
Yeah, I'll have a little bit of a different take on it. I think one of the differences, Jackie, is in terms of lesson learned, is that the situation on the ground is very different. There are organizations that simply didn't exist in 2010 that now exist. I already mentioned a few of them: World Central Kitchen, JPHRO, CORE. But in the few days after the earthquake, more casualties were being flown in. So JTF, Department of Defense helicopters arrived, but what did they find? Well, at the airport, you had an organization like Haiti Air Ambulance, which is an organization based here in Haiti that has helicopters right here in Haiti, and expert medical teams here, as well as Hero Client Rescue, same thing, teams in Haiti. They had set up a triage center at the airport. So they were able to link up with Department of Defense helicopters to deploy them to go, hey, where are you going to go get patients? Flew them back to the Port-au-Prince airport because the hospitals in the South were overwhelmed. Ad hoc set up a triage center by the airfield with local connections, set up the Port-au-Prince hospital networks to accept those patients, and CAM ambulance, which is the government ambulance service, and Hero and others had ambulances waiting, put those patients, critical patients in, got them admitted to the hospitals and deployed. Well, that's a situation where those organizations, Haiti Air Ambulance and Hero and so forth, didn't exist, but it was Haitian organizations on the ground coordinating with Department of Defense assets to make a difference that would not have been possible in 2010.
And
I think a big lesson is that knowing what we know of the disaster, the climate disasters that are happening, as well as, you know, the earthquake prone fault lines that we're on, is that it's more effective when we're planning beforehand. And as you mentioned earlier, Jackie, a lot of money doesn't go into preparedness and planning. It's the majority comes in, you know, responding to a disaster. We all know $1 is the equivalent, $1 in preparedness is the equivalent of $10 in response. So that dollar goes so much further if we are linking with, you know, the DPC and all, you know, World Central Kitchen, us. We have a shorthand that we're so much more effective working together because we already know where we're going, who's doing what. If we can just get that done beforehand and start having these discussions with, you know, the usual suspects, the folks that are very, 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 you know, dedicated to Haiti, and make those small investments in the preparedness phase, that would go a long way. And I just hope that we can do that and bring in more partners. Again, we do that already with some. It'd be great to bring in some of the larger donors, like, you know, USAID and, you know, whatever, the French, and, you know, but also sort of under that umbrella of DPC. So that's my big advocacy goal for the next 6 months to the year.
well, you've led us right into our wrap up here. And so first of all, I want to thank each of you for your insight. I know we didn't get to all of the questions. I think some of them are very specific. But one of the things that I want to present to each of you, including you, Dan, you're talking to members of Congress who are holding the pen, the envelope, and the checkbook. If there is one ask that you would put forward in terms of, because we're still sort of in this kind of emergency phase, but we're going to get out of this emergency phase, and you're going to still be dealing with the reality, which is that there are tens of thousands of people today who are homeless. They do not have hurricane shelters. They do not have schools. We are still in the midst of a hurricane season. This is a country that is very vulnerable to disasters. It's a country with a volatile security situation. The economy is a mess. It was already facing a humanitarian crisis, but yet, you know, people live, they want to live, and they enjoy life, and they want to enjoy life. They don't, somebody asked about whether there's a fear of mass migration. I think there's always a concern about migration, but there are people who don't want to leave. You have a generation of Haitians who say, I want to live in this country. This is my country. So for each of you, thank you again for being a part of this discussion. But if there is an ask that you would like to see in the discussions that are taking place in Washington, in New York, in Paris, about how do you assist this country in order to either move forward or prepare for the next big one, what would that be? And if you can just wrap it up with some of your closing remarks. And I'll start with you.
I would ask the general public, as well as major donors, to not hide behind, you know, the whole list that you just laid out in terms of insecurity and, you know, hurricane prone and all those things, in terms of losing hope and that things can't not change here, because it's not true. As you said, you know, the majority of Haitians, despite all of this, are still living and thriving and you know, getting through the day. And if any of these elements, these very complex issues, hit any city in the United States, we would be dissolved into chaos and absolute anarchy. But the fact that here, outside of Port-au-Prince, that you still have the security that you do, it's still safe in some of those areas outside of Port-au-Prince. I mean, it's just not enough of a reason to give up hope on Haiti. We need to make the investments in this country for so many reasons. It is where it is because of racism, a history of racism. And we have a moral obligation to not turn our backs here. So do not lose hope and do what you can in whatever way you can to continue supporting Haiti.
Thank you. And Jean Marc.
So what would be my greatest ask? Well, you didn't win a Pulitzer for nothing, Jackie Charles, but I have a long list here. But I would certainly echo Anne. Look, Haiti's an amazing place. It's contributed an amazing amount to history of the United States, in particular, to the legacy of freedom globally. And so it is an amazing place that deserves the world's attention and effort to help in these times of need and moving forward. I would point to, there are existing organizations here in Haiti, all right, that are making a difference every day. And it's tough sometimes, I'll tell you, in terms of our hospital, every year to come to people to justify year in and year out. But there's a value in having organizations functioning on the ground, doing a great job year in and year out. This year is my hospital's 65th year of continuous operation in Haiti, serving some of the most underserved populations here. I know that there's many others, newer organizations, like I mentioned, Haiti Air Ambulance, Partners in Health, amazing history, including their new hospital in Mirebalais. There's great organizations doing great things that deserve our support. And one last thing, Jackie, in terms of a diaspora, we have the most dynamic, passionate diaspora, I think, of any country in the world. These are folks that they or their families left difficult conditions in Haiti. They were able to be immigrants into the United States and contribute greatly to the success of the United States. They came from very difficult situations and have become very successful professionally in the US, and they're still passionate about their country. It's a challenging dynamic when you come with people that really care, but it is really one of our greatest assets in Haiti, and we have to find a way to get them involved here as well.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Keane.
Well, I echo what has already been said in terms of everyone should look how they can best help organizations that are on the ground doing work every day to help the Haitian people that are Haitian-led and support those organizations. I think for politicians, they have to answer the questions themselves. In the United States, why is it in the national interest of the United States to help Haiti? And I would argue that it's significantly in our interest in a number of ways, and more so because they're in our hemisphere, and what's good for Haiti is good for America, and we need to do what we can to help the Haitians provide economic prosperity, and so that we are not responding every time there's a disaster like this.
Okay. Dan, we're going to modify yours a little bit. We know that we need the Haitians to get on the same page. We know that we need to have some stability in the political environment so that we can deal with the security and some of the other issues. But for you, what do you need from the administration or from Congress in order to have some success in Haiti? You've been dialoguing. Somebody said to me the other day, Dan Foote is talking to everybody. But what do you need for that talk to translate into action, meaningful action, concrete action? What would you like?
Well, you didn't really throw me that big of a curveball because I was prepared for that. First of all, let me say that Jean Marc barely looks as if he's been able to do this for 65 years at this point in time. But there's a huge list of competing interests in Washington, right? You have Afghanistan, you have Louisiana and New York and New England, all over the world. And this administration is overwhelmed by crises and disasters. Haiti is very close to us. We have always been her closest supporter and need to do so now. If I were to ask everybody out there what they can do, you can donate to credible organizations, Or you can write your elected officials and let them know that you believe we need additional resources for Haiti. I'm doing that myself, but I'm not a constituent of all these folks. So I think just helping our elected guys and gals understand the criticality and the urgency on Haiti, and the fact that if we don't help, nobody else is going to help. That's my biggest ask, that people help move that in that direction. As Jean Marc and General Keane and Ann have all said, don't lose hope. Look, a plan is emerging, and it's a viable plan. It's not an easy plan. Nothing's ever easy on that part of the island. But it needs not only your support individually, it needs major US government support. And it's my job to sort of manage that, but I can't be the only voice asking for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bruce, I am going to turn it, I'm sorry, Brian, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I'd like to, of course, a special thanks to our speakers and Jean Marc, Ambassador Lieutenant General Keane, for what has been an incredibly important discussion. Of course, a special thanks to Jacqueline Charles for driving such an exceptional discussion. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a quick shout out to our co-sponsors at the Kimberly Green Latin American Caribbean Center, the African and African Diaspora Program, and FIU's Extreme Events Institute. And then finally, I'll take this last 10 seconds to make a shameless plug for FIU's Security Research Hub, which is a virtual security community connecting people to data, people to research, and people to people. It's an emerging platform that we're developing to leverage the depth and breadth of publicly available information and harness it around prevailing security issues facing us in our hemisphere. And so with that, thank you all so much for attending. We had well over 230 participants that joined us via Zoom, and many more through our streaming platforms. And so an impactful discussion, I'm sure. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
All right, thank you. Thank you. We'll talk.